These are flashcards, and if you're a student, you know what flashcards are. You will have heard of them before. I mean, these are old school, right? These are actual physical flashcards, and I bought these while I was going through medical school. You can see that they are, they've got like a picture, and then on the back it's got kind of what the labels are, different pieces of anatomy. It's quite a handy little thing, but incredibly misused and abused by most students because flashcards are not as effective as people would have you to believe. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got a lot of experience with flashcards. In fact, in my first 3 years of university, I probably accumulated like 6,000 to 7,000 flashcards for my topics, and I used them a lot. Not every single year in total, of course, but it was a nightmare. And I think those of you that use flashcards a lot probably understand this, is that at a certain point, you have so many flashcards that you just end up on this endless flashcard grind. Now, I don't have 6,000 of these physical flashcards. I had them on my phone. And I used a number of different apps, and the one that I kind of settled on was Anki, which is kind of the most common, most famous, well-known flashcard app. And for what it does, it's really good. It does flashcards, it does them well. It's got a good spaced repetition algorithm that's built into it. The algorithm is relatively accurate. There are a lot of add-ons that you can add to customize it, which most of the time aren't even really very necessary. But it's pretty good, and you can be sitting at your laptop on your computer, reading some stuff and putting them into flashcards as you go, and you are leveraging off the power of spaced repetition and active recall by using flashcards, which we know are relatively effective. So, that's good, and there's nothing wrong with using flashcards, but the problem is how much we use flashcards and what we put on the flashcards. And so, while I was going through the educational literature and research on this, and when I was teaching students about how to use flashcards and memorize more effectively, it became really, really clear that relying on flashcards was a game and a strategy that does not win. And even if you're using digital flashcards, even if you're being quite selective with it, and even if you're being diligent with the spaced repetition, which by the way has its own host of issues. If you're not familiar with the limitations of spaced repetition, definitely recommend you to check out our video on spaced repetition as well. Flashcards are a great tool when you use them correctly. Unfortunately, most people use flashcards the wrong way. And if you are familiar with the idea of a flashcard grind, where every single day you're spending hours just doing flashcards to the point where you have so many flashcards that you don't even have time to do them anymore, but you still feel like you're learning because you made the flashcards, even though you deep down know that you're not because you didn't even do them, then you know what I'm talking about. This is the problem with flashcards, the way that most people use them wrong. So, how do students tend to use flashcards? Well, number one, they tend to have a lot of them, okay? So by a lot, I mean that for an entire topic, you might have like 50 to 100 flashcards for that topic, going over a lot of the details, often having your definitions and stuff on there. The other way that students tend to use flashcards is that they rely on the flashcards for a large proportion of their learning. And large proportion is a subjective term. It might be 20%, it might be 30%, it might be 50%, it might be 60%. But what I mean is that if you were to take the flashcards away, you would lose so much of your learning that you would really struggle to get a high mark in your tests and exams. And that's a reliance on flashcards. So both of these things are very, very bad. Number one, because if you are relying on having a high volume of flashcards, due to the nature of flashcards using spaced repetition, it means that every flashcard you create is making more work for yourself in the future. So let's say that you have 3 hours to study every single day. In the beginning, you don't need to spend too much time on the flashcards because you don't have that many, but you will continuously accumulate them, which means that as time goes on, you're not only needing to do the flashcards that you create brand new, but you're also having to revise the flashcards that you created before. So it you don't kind of clear it every single day. It actually stacks and builds on top of itself until all of your time, your 3 hours a day, is used up by just doing flashcards, which usually you don't. So you end up not doing some of them. And then there's kind of no point in the first place because you're not even doing the flashcards properly. So the fact that it relies on spaced repetition and the fact that they're so easy to make often means that we are making a lot of them, but we're not actually able to get the learning that we should be getting if time restriction wasn't an issue. So that's one major issue with flashcards. And if there was unlimited time, it wouldn't matter. But if there was unlimited time, then a lot of things wouldn't matter. And then, so the second issue there is that we have that flashcard dependence. And so obviously, if you're not doing the flashcards, you're not getting the learning, therefore having the dependence is dangerous. But also it takes away from a different type of learning that would reduce the need for having flashcards in the first place, which is our relational priority learning, which I've covered more intensely in another video. But the idea is that when you learn through relationships instead of through information, you're able to retain information much more easily. And therefore, you actually don't even need to do the flashcard in the first place because you're not going to forget it, which is a concept that I think a lot of people are very unfamiliar with, that have very little experience with, but we're consistently able to get our students to the point where they don't really need many flashcards at all, because most of what they would put on the flashcard in the first place, they're simply not going to forget, and therefore they don't need to revise it. So it kind of defeats the point of even needing flashcards at all. And that's the direction that we should be aiming towards. We should be using flashcards as a supplement. So what is the right way to use flashcards? Well, the right way to use flashcards is only possible when you remove the dependence on flashcards, because otherwise you have nothing to fill the void. I can't just say use less flashcards because then you have nothing to use instead. So we need to replace our dependence on flashcards with our relational priority learning, and we need to create a system of learning that is fundamentally relationship driven. So the first step is to make sure that we're learning through that relationship priority. And again, check out that video if you haven't already. And once we have a system that's set up that means that your level of retention to begin with is extremely high, then we no longer have the need for memorization specific techniques like active recall and spaced repetition, because those things are always a net at the bottom of the cliff. We want to use them as little as possible. And that's a hallmark of any highly efficient learner, rather than someone that's just tweaking and optimizing a fundamentally broken system. Once we're able to do that, we will naturally find that the amount of flashcards we need to use is a lot less. And then we can start transitioning away from depending on flashcards, and we use it as a supplement only for those very specific details that do not fit into our relationships, which therefore we're more likely to forget. So if we have a relationship focused learning, then 80 to 90% of everything that we learn will be very highly retained to begin with, and then we can use flashcards after that. Now, I know a lot of people at this point say, oh, but Justin, different people learn differently. Well, yes, that's true, but your brain is not the special snowflake that was born the 0.0000001% of the population that is fundamentally different to every other human brain. We're talking about fundamental ways that the human brain works. And relationship-focused and relational learning is something that is universal for all different people. There is no one that's really out there that can only learn through memorization. There is no one out there that needs to rely on repetition and spaced repetition and active recall in order to learn. In actual fact, I have very, very rarely, and in fact, I can't think of a single person in the thousands of students that I've worked with that has actually been using a correct technique and still found that they needed to rely on memorization. I've never actually seen that in my own practice across thousands of students from multiple different countries at different year levels studying different curriculums. The idea of different people learn differently is something that is for variations on the fundamentals when they're done correctly, individual preferences for different types of techniques and styles, which does make a difference and is very important to do, but it doesn't mean that you neglect some of the basic fundamentals. That's like someone that has only learned to walk on their knees saying, oh, I just walk differently, therefore I'm not gonna try to walk on my feet. And it's like, all right, you do you, buddy, but I'm pretty sure if you start walking on your feet, you're gonna find a style of walking that works for you that's probably better than walking on your knees. So, in the thousands of students that I've worked with, helping them get the top grades, it's not possible to veer away from flashcards, either physical or digital, without having a more efficient underlying system of learning that stops you from needing to memorize in the first place. But once you're able to unlock that, then I promise that you will be able to move away from this flashcard dependency and start unlocking a type of learning that is much more effective. So hopefully that opened your eyes a little bit in terms of flashcards. I know every YouTube guru out there talks about flashcards like they are the savior for all academic issues, but I promise that's not the case, and there are actually very few instances where relying on flashcards is a good long-term strategy. If you found this video useful, or if you disagree with anything that I said, leave a comment below. I'd love to have that discussion and maybe even make a video talking about some of the points that you mentioned. Share it with your friends, leave a comment, leave a like. If you like what we are posting, subscribe, and otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.